Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we try to figure out if companies are cooking the books or if they are cooking with gas. Today we are uncorking a filing from uniQure's, and let me tell you, it is full of exciting news about a new treatment. So what is this all about? uniQure put out a report on the 24th of September that is basically a big update on their drug called AMT-130. This drug is being tested for Huntington's disease, a really tough condition. They are sharing some really positive results from their studies, and they are also talking about what's next in getting this drug approved. Now, this report is called a Form 8K. Think of it as a special report that companies file when something really important happens that the public needs to know about outside of their regular financial reports. It is like a company shouting from the rooftops about a major event, and in this case, that major event is the promising data for AMT-130. uniQure's main product we are talking about here is their ordinary shares traded under the ticker QURE, primarily on the NASDAQ stock market. The report starts by telling us about a press release they put out on the 24th of September. This press release is all about the latest on their AMT-130 clinical trials. They held a special call and webcast that same day to talk about these updates. This press release is attached as an exhibit to this report, which means it's like an important attachment showing all the details. They also mentioned that the event will be available for replay on their website. Then we get to the really juicy part, which is the report on the clinical trials themselves. uniQure announced positive results, also known as top-line data, from their main study testing AMT-130 for Huntington's disease. This includes follow-up information from patients in both the US and Europe. They have been talking with the US Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and they agreed that the data from the early parts of their studies, called Cohorts 1 and 2, can be compared to a group of patients who did not receive the drug, but whose medical history is very similar. This comparison is like having a control group to see how well the drug is actually working. This comparison, which they call a propensity score, matched external control, could be a major part of their application for approval. They even have some extra studies or protocols designed specifically to gather this data and compare it to the external group. They are pooling data from their US and European studies for this. Let's dive into the numbers. In the US study, they had 26 patients with early signs of Huntington's disease. These patients were split into 3 groups. One group got a low dose of AMT-130, another got a high dose, and a third group had a fake treatment called a sham procedure, which is basically a procedure that looks like the real thing but without the active drug. This is a standard way to make sure the results are truly from the drug and not just from the experience of having a procedure. The patients who received the drug got a single dose delivered directly to a part of their brain called the striatum, which is where the damage from Huntington's happens. The study is designed to follow patients for a year and then keep tracking the treated patients for 5 more years. They also mentioned that 4 patients who were initially in the control group later switched to receiving the actual treatment. In Europe, their study had 13 patients with early Huntington's disease, split into low and high dose groups. They also added a third group with 12 more patients from both the US and Europe. This new group was designed to test the drug at both doses, but with added medicine to prevent immune reactions, which is a common concern with gene therapies. They are also currently enrolling another group in the US to test the high dose in patients who have smaller volumes in certain parts of their brain compared to earlier patients. Now for the results, which are pretty impressive, they looked at 29 patients treated with AMT-130, with 17 getting the high dose and 12 getting the low dose. Importantly, 12 patients in each dose group had been followed for 36 months, which is 3 years. Let's talk about the big wins for patients getting the high dose of AMT-130. The study showed a significant. That means it's very unlikely to be by chance 75% slowing down of the disease progression. They measured this using a special rating scale called QDRs. This met their main goal for the study. On this scale, the treated patients had a very small change, showing the disease was barely getting worse, while the patients in the comparison group experienced a much larger change, meaning their disease progressed much faster. Another major success was in measuring how well patients could function. They saw a 60% slowing in the decline of what's called total functional capacity, or TFC. This is a really important measure because it reflects what patients can actually do in their daily lives. This also met a key goal of the study. Again, the high-dose AMT-130 patients showed barely any change in their ability to function, while the control group saw a significant drop. They also looked at several other measures for things like motor skills and thinking ability, which together make up that QDR score. For example, they saw an 88% slowing in something called the symbol Digit Modalities Test, or SDMT, which is a test of cognitive processing speed. This result was actually very close to being statistically significant. Another test, the Stroop Word Reading Test, or CORT, which measures things like attention and cognitive control, showed an incredible 113% slowing. This means the patients in the control group actually got worse faster than the treated group improved on this measure. The p-value here is very low, meaning the result is highly statistically significant. And for motor function measured by the Total Motor Score, or TMS, they observed a 59% slowing. While this result wasn't statistically significant, it's still a positive trend. They also looked at a marker in the fluid around the brain and spinal cord called neurofilament light protein, or NFL. This is a sign of nerve damage. They saw a reduction of over 8% in patients treated with the high dose. High levels of NFL are linked to more severe Huntington's disease, so seeing this reduction is very encouraging, suggesting the drug might be protecting the nerves. uniQure believes these results show that AMT-130 works better at higher doses. They saw good consistent results in the high dose group for the measures of how well patients function and their motor and thinking skills after 3 years. The low dose group showed less consistent results, which supports the idea that you need a certain amount of the drug to get the full benefit. When it comes to safety, AMT-130 was generally well tolerated. This means the side effects were manageable at both the low and high doses. They specifically mentioned that no new side effects related to the drug itself have been seen since December of the previous year. The most common issues were related to the actual procedure of delivering the drug, and these all went away. Looking ahead, uniQure plans to meet with the FDA soon to discuss these findings before they officially apply for approval to sell the drug. This meeting is called a pre-BLA meeting. They are aiming to submit their full application, known as a Biologic License Application, or BLA, in the first 3 months of 2026. Now, like any company dealing with new treatments, uniQure includes a section about forward-looking statements. This is where they talk about what they expect to happen in the future, like their plans for that 4th study group and the meetings with the FDA. It's important to remember that these are predictions, and actual results could be different due to many reasons, like the success of clinical trials and how regulatory agencies respond. They mention that their future results could be different from what they are predicting for many reasons. They also highlight the risks involved. For example, there is always a chance that the trial data might not be good enough for further development or approval. They also mention that initial positive results, like the top-line data we just discussed, might not be the same as later, more complete results. And of course, interactions with regulatory bodies like the FDA can always impact the timing and progress of their plans. They also talk about protecting their ideas, which is crucial for any company developing new technology or treatments. Finally, the report lists the exhibits, and the most important one is Exhibit 99.1, which is the full press release. So, what's my take on all this? uniQure is presenting some really encouraging data for AMT-130. The fact that they are seeing significant slowing of disease progression in key measures for Huntington's disease, especially at the 3-year mark, is a big deal. The strong results on QTRs and TFC are particularly noteworthy because they directly impact how patients live their lives. The safety profile also seems manageable, which is always a priority. The clear dose, dependent response also strengthens their case for the drug's effectiveness. However, we need to keep in mind that these are still results from phase 1/2 trials. While positive, the real test will be in larger, more extensive trials, if they are required. The company's ability to navigate the regulatory approval process with the FDA and then successfully launch and market the drug will be key. There is always a risk that future data could differ, or that regulatory agencies might have further requests. But based on what they've presented here, uniQure is on a promising path, and this report paints a very optimistic picture for the future of AMT-130. Alright, that's our breakdown of uniQure's latest filing. What's your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord in the description for more discussions and insights. Thanks for watching, see you next time.